So I decided to make this video knowing full well that there is a 0% chance that I could ever fully flesh out all the topics that came to mind while I was going through this module, but I did want to contribute a coherent, non-judgmental response to a lot of the things I read in the discussion board. Also, I feel like discussions around touchy subjects like this one are made a little bit more palatable when you can see the other person's body language and facial expressions. There's a lot of power in the way you say something, and that doesn't come across in text. That said, forgive me if this video is a little bit all over the place. It wasn't really a planned thing, so I'm just gonna run through the bullet points that I wanted to address. Let's go. Number one, white privilege is a real thing. It's not something you have to look inside yourself to see if it exists. It does exist. It's like a default setting. It's just there. It's a real thing, unlike CP time, which is a made-up thing. Apparently it comes from some stereotype that started somewhere that black people are always late, and now the term CP time is used jokingly. For example, hey, what time does that concert start? It starts at 7. CP time, so just mosey in around 9:30, you're good. I think that's what she was referring to when she said you can walk into a meeting or something late and it not be a reflection on her entire race. I feel like if you're reading about white privilege for the first time and you're like, what? Huh? That never even crossed my mind. Put the rope down, Christian. Chances are you're white. I realized a long time ago that having a flesh-colored band-aid blend into my flesh was not a benefit that I was meant to enjoy. I've made peace with that, and despite that crippling disadvantage, I've managed to turn out okay. Which is the point I want to say now, but I'll come back to later, that white privilege isn't always about big things. It's about subtle things, because racism isn't huge anymore. It's subtle, which is part of the reason that the majority of the scenarios on Peggy McIntosh's list are pretty much invalid, because they were experiences she had decades and decades ago. Thankfully, it's a good thing that we can go down that list and say that's not true, that's not true, that's not true anymore. But the fact that those scenarios aren't true anymore doesn't mean white privilege doesn't exist. Here's another thing to address. Do I think that teaching and discussing white privilege causes more problems? No, but maybe the answer is yes if the specific problem you're referring to is white guilt, which is a really crappy thing. No one wants to feel guilty, and you know, you should feel guilty if you're a racist. If not, then you should not feel guilty at all. You didn't do anything. Also, really important in understanding this concept, I think we need to reevaluate the use of the word privilege, because it reeks of, here, let me give you this special thing because you are special. And maybe if you're white, you're like, hey, it's not my fault. I didn't do anything to ask for this list of privileges, and don't try to make me feel guilty for having them. And you shouldn't. Instead of privilege, think of immunity. You're immune from certain life experiences, internal and external, big and small, based solely on the race that you are. That's not an accusatory thing, it's just the way this country's history has played itself out, and that's the way things are right now. It's a default setting, and it's a relative thing. Let's say Bob and Kareem walk into my office. It's not like I'm giving Bob $1 million and giving Kareem nothing. It's more like I'm taking all of Kareem's money and leaving Bob as he is. In the end, Bob is no better or worse off than he was when he walked in my office, but compared to Kareem, he is at a relative advantage by default. Just by the fact that I took all of Jamal's money, Jamal's screwed, and Bob's not. That is the fundamental idea under white privilege. And that's not an accusatory thing. We're not saying Bob is a bad person or that he did anything wrong necessarily. If you think that talking about white privilege causes more problems, then a question you might ask is, what is the usefulness of talking about white privilege? I think it's a tool to give you insight into the lived experiences of people of other cultures, and if you're white, to give you insight into the experiences that you have that you may even be oblivious to. Dan brought up a good point. This entire semester has been an exercise in understanding other people's cultures. It's easy to understand and sympathize with the experience of someone being forced to sit in the back of the bus or not allowed to drink from a certain water fountain. That's an easy thing to say, oh, look at that experience this person is having based solely on their race. That sucks. You might even add to that, I'm glad I don't have to experience that. I'm glad I'm immune to it. In that way, I think white privilege is a useful cognitive tool to understand those experiences. It's just that now it has a name. Will teaching white privilege perpetuate racism and cause segregation between whites and non-whites? Nar. That's the best Australian accent I can do. If it were true that acknowledging and discussing discrimination, racial disparities, and privilege actually increased racism, then it should follow logically that all the buzz around race during the civil rights movement should have set us back a couple of decades. That's not really what happened, was it? Sort of didn't work out that way, did it? No, sort of turned out to be a really good thing for our country. I love how Brits turn all of their declarative statements into questions. Don't they? Calling attention to white privilege doesn't make anything worse. A hallmark of white privilege, like male privilege, is the privilege to be oblivious to the entire ordeal. Hence the term invisible knapsack. You don't even know it's there. Whether we give it a name or not, I think at least non-whites are solidly aware of the fact that it exists. Going back to Kareem and Bob, it doesn't matter if we officially say that we gave Bob a benefit. Kareem got all his money taken away. It's not fair, and he knows it. Here's an interesting study. If I have a black name and you have a white name and we send out identical resumes, you're twice as likely to get a call back. Why? Because you're white, or presumed to be white based on your name. That is not hiding behind hardships or stereotypes or excuses. That is not somebody's mountain to overcome. That is white privilege.
There's always gonna be another mountain. I'm always gonna
Miley Cyrus for you. Factoid, I was born in Nashville, Tennessee, the home of country music, and Achy Breaky Heart was my very first favorite song. To now be singing the ballads of Billy Ray Cyrus's Offspring kind of makes me feel like a senior citizen. Hands up, playing my song, the butterflies fly away. Finally, it was brought up that racism is passed on from generation to generation, and that's absolutely true, but it's passed on by being racist, not talking about racism. That is the incredible thing and the terrifying thing about having kids. You can indoctrinate them. You can teach them really, really good stuff, or you can teach them really, really awful stuff. In fact, racist parents teaching their kids to be little racists is the reason I heard the N-word for the first time when I was 5. Your daddy is a no he's not. My mama said. I was 5, I didn't know what the N-word meant, so I ran home and asked my mom, and she gave me an appropriate 5-year-old answer that had nothing to do with race, said it was someone who was stupid and lazy. I was like, my dad's not stupid and lazy. Oh, guess Jessica's wrong. Oh, in your face, Jessica. So I think that's about enough for this video. Feel free to leave comments or questions or I don't know, whatever. I'm gonna go interpret some EKGs now. I'll see you on Monday. Goodbye.